you.
Awesome. We negate our sole contention is preventing conflict over Kashmir. Since their country's creation in 1947, Pakistan has been fighting India tooth and nail for control of Kashmir. Goal of the New York Times writes this March that after partition, left undecided was the states of Jammu and Kashmir, a Muslim-majority state in the Himalayas. Both countries continue to administer their portions of territory while hoping to get full control of it. Troops on both sides of the border regularly fire volleys at each other. India's accession to the UNSC will push their intermittent conflict over the brink for two reasons. First is economic punishment. Pakistan needs IMF loans to shore up its crumbling economy. Jeffrey Gettleman writes in the New York Times in 2019, with barely enough foreign reserves to cover their monthly bills, Pakistan's government needs a large bailout from the IMF. On the streets, discontent is rising. The Pakistani government's decision to raise levies on fuel and collect more taxes from ordinary Pakistanis have made people even angrier. However, as a member of the Security Council, India would cut off that lifeline to punish Pakistan. Mir Khan of the University of Balochistan explains in 2015 that in the NSC, the economic power of India could be devastating for Pakistan. As a permanent member, India could use its influence over international financial institutions such as the IMF to prevent Pakistan's access, which would lead to a debilitating blow to their economy. Second is the end of peace. Pakistan attempts two ways of gaining control of Kashmir: peaceful mediation and state-sponsored terror. Pakistan, the much smaller country of the two, needs the support of the UNSC against India. Pakistan relies on the UN to resolve the Kashmir dispute diplomatically, since they cannot stand up to India by themselves. According to a 2018 Dawn News article, while Pakistan has continuously sought the UN's good offices to resolve the dispute, India opposes mediation. India would use a seat on the Security Council to make sure that the UN works for its interest, destroying Pakistan's hope in a neutral UN. David Bosco of the Indiana University School of Global International Studies explains in 2009, a council with India as the permanent member that passed resolutions condemning Pakistan would look less legitimate than today. This would ruin any hope of peace in Pakistan's mind. Overall, Shamsa Nawaz of the Institute of Strategic Studies explains in 2017 that with India's presence on the Security Council, the very existence of Pakistan would be endangered since the division of the subcontinent remains a sore point. India's seat on the Security Council would force Pakistan to double down on terrorism, striking at India's heart. Shah of the ORF writes last year that Pakistan uses jihad conducted by subnational groups with state support to allow it to punch above its geopolitical weight. A major Pakistani terror attack would lead both countries down the path of war. Ragjai of Dissent magazine writes in 2003 that Indian strategists have argued that India should be prepared to fight limited war under nuclear conditions. That is, military operations of a limited conventional nature in response to Pakistani terror. Worse yet, because of a uniquely polarized geopolitical and internal climate, Foreign Affairs writes in 2019 that if Pakistani terror crisis were to occur today, both India and Pakistan cannot de-escalate the crisis on their own. Conventional war could easily go nuclear. Herrera of the Pacific Standard writes in February that Pakistan could plausibly deploy a nuclear weapon in response to a conventional attack since they maintain a smaller army than India and would be overwhelmed if the Indian military invaded. Facing nation collapse, Islamabad could launch a nuclear weapon to even the playing field. More so, Pakistan could let their nukes fly dangerously easily. Lendon of CNN writes last year that if the situation were to deteriorate for them, nukes could be used before commanders in Islamabad could stop them. Pakistan has a strategic policy of delegating nuclear release approval down to lower-level tactical units. There is a real danger of loose nukes, lower-level bellicose commanders using tactical nuclear weapons if they see fit. Thus, Shankar of the New York Times writes in 2002 that a full-scale nuclear exchange could kill up to 12 million people immediately. Even a more limited nuclear war would have cataclysmic results. Thus, we are very proud to negate.
Can I see a couple cards?
Yeah.
Can I see that Pakistan feels that their very existence is threatened?
Yep.
And then both nations can't de-escalate without help. Sorry for that. Okay, cool.
And Foreign Affairs.
Yeah. I may read context of that. We'll start. Is everybody ready to begin? Bridgewater affirms, Contention 1 is keeping the peace. The United Nations writes that peacekeeping operations protect civilians, disarm former combatants, support free elections, protect human rights, and restore the rule of law in conflict zones. Thus, peacekeepers have proven time and time again to be one of the most effective tools in establishing stability around the globe. Granting India permanent status on the Security Council would promote these beneficial peacekeeping operations in three main ways. First is increasing the funding of peacekeeping operations, as the Express Tribune writes that right now, peacekeeping financing is largely provided by the permanent council members. As other members are reducing contributions right now, the future of these operations is on the brink of collapse. However, India can save the day, as the Economic Times 18 explains that India is ready to assume financial responsibilities arising out of its permanent membership on the Security Council. Because permanent members collectively fund over half of the peacekeeper budget, adding India would substantially increase overall funding. Second is preventing the withdrawal of current peacekeeping operations, as the Global Policy Forum explains that India, who wants a permanent seat on the Council, has threatened to reduce their financial or military troop contribution to the UN if they are not rewarded with permanent member status. Affirming would prevent India, the second largest contributor of peacekeepers to the UN, contributing a whopping 180,000 troops for over 49 UN peacekeeping missions, from withdrawing. If the current Indian strategy fails, Gupta explains that denying permanent membership to India would leave India with no option but to downscale participation in peacekeeping operations. An Indian withdrawal would be devastating, as Ani of Business Standard explains that India trains the peacekeepers of 85 countries, making it a crucial linchpin to any successful peacekeeping operation. Third is encouraging contributions to peacekeeping operations. The Global Policy Forum explains that rewarding India, who provides immense peacekeeper contributions with a permanent seat at the Council, would entice other nations to contribute more peacekeepers to get a permanent seat on the Council as well. Overall, Holtman of Florida State University explains that the size of the UN's commitment is critical, as an operation's success depends upon the number of personnel deployed. As the UN's forces commitment increases, so does its ability to protect civilians. Overall, increasing peacekeeping operations maintains global stability, as Miller of the Journal on Conflict Resolution quantifies that the chance of peace rises by 19% for every additional 1,000 peacekeepers present. Herge of the Journal of Politics furthers that just a $200 billion increase in peacekeeper funding would reduce global conflict by 2/3, saving hundreds of thousands of lives across the globe. Contention 2 is pulling the plug. The United Nations has recently adopted a more aggressive stance in interventionism. Indeed, Murray 13 of the National Interest writes that the Responsibility to Protect Doctrine, or the R2P, has enabled the UN to intervene in several more conflicts. Unfortunately, Murray furthers that these R2P interventions have often failed, as they are vast departures from traditional military missions, where the enemy is very difficult to find, foreign forces are rarely welcomed with a red carpet, and insurgent forces are more familiar with the terrain and local intricacies than external forces could ever be. Because of these complications, Murray ultimately concludes that R2P interventions have done more harm than good. Fortunately, affirming and adding India to the Security Council creates a check on Western interventionism, as Bukhanty of the ORF confirms that India believes the R2P is used to effect regime change that is pliant to the West's demands and requirements, rather than protecting civilians from murderous dictators like Libya in 2011. This is why Hall explains that India is fundamentally opposed to interventions under the R2P, a stance he finds unlikely to change. The impact is ending unsuccessful interventions, as he furthers that India was starkly against interventions like the one in Libya, which ultimately turned out to be a disaster. Cooperman of the Belfer Center reports that the conflict in Libya was on the downswing prior to intervention. However, the intervention inflamed the dying conflict, causing casualties to spike by 700% and prolonging the conflict by 7 months. Even worse, Cooperman furthers that the intervention in Libya inspired rebels in Syria, who also hope to attract global attention by forcing an intervention of their own. Thus, he concludes that our invasion in Libya also caused neighboring conflicts like the one in Syria to see a 1,000% increase in deaths. Maintain global peace and affirm. Thank you.
Could we see the conclusion of the Miller or Herge studies?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, conclusion to both Miller and Bridge.
Yeah. This is very Actually, that's fine. You can just say the other one again.
Do you want Miller, or do you just want the?
No, just doing it. Yeah.
But I believe you have first question, so whenever you're ready.
So on your second contention, if India isn't doing R2P interventions, what is going to happen to interventions? Like, where are they going to intervene?
Okay, so the problem, right, is that, like, under the broad term of, like, peacekeeping, there's different types of interventions, right? What we say is that R2P interventions, where we just go in without permission from the country, is really, really bad because we don't know the local terrain, and as a result, disasters like Libya will occur again.
Okay.
There are other types of traditional peacekeeping where we work with the governments. That's why those types of peacekeeping are much more successful.
So
Can I ask you a question?
Sorry, just to clarify, it's traditional peacekeeping, which is what peacekeeping looked like prior to 2005, like mostly in the 90s.
Yeah.
Mostly like that.
Not necessarily, right?
Why?
Sure.
That's what
Some of those
traditional
traditional in the sense that, like, these are not the interventions that are justified under the R2P doctrine. Right now, the United Nations sends missions across the globe, peacekeeping missions, that don't utilize R2P, where we work with the governments in order to ensure that stability is fostered within the nation. So both still exist, but we want to get rid of R2P.
What kind of peacekeeping does India like? Do they like more traditional peacekeeping or offensive peacekeeping?
Well, they don't like R2P peacekeeping.
Well, yes, but within that, do they like more traditional peacekeeping or offensive peacekeeping?
I suppose they like more like traditional peacekeeping. Can I ask you a question? We've been on this for a little while. All right, so let's talk about, like, the IMF.
Yep.
Why would other countries who are, like, friendly to, you know, like Pakistan, for instance, on the Security Council, like China, ever allow India to, like, block money from the IMF going to the to Pakistan?
China doesn't have very much of a say over the IMF. The IMF is like a Western
So,
organization.
how does IMF voting work?
What our argument is that when countries join the Security Council, they have more political clout, meaning that what they can do is they can say to, like, the U.S., who has most of the power on the IMF, if you give us a loan, we will do something for you on the Security Council, or we will support you.
But what we're going to argue, right, is that the IMF isn't a very political body, right? The way it works is that on the IMF, different countries, it works on, like, a quota system, right? Based on how much you contribute to the IMF is what percentage of voting power you have. That doesn't change when India gets on the Security Council unless they, like, magically start contributing, like, tons of money.
Our point is that India can trade political favors. They can do things on the Security Council.
Yeah, and other countries can do that as well. But insofar as, like, a lot of...
Of course, other countries can do that, but since India is a permanent member on the Security Council, which is only 5 other nations, they have significant say. So one second.
Yeah,
the way that we know that this is true is that historically, when countries have gotten on the Security Council, they have gotten more IMF loans and have had less conditions on their loans. Can I ask you a question?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so your third argument is that other countries will, like, still look at India as a model and contribute more peacekeepers to get on the council. That is correct, yeah. So, if what you're saying is that the way that India is getting on the council is by contributing less peacekeepers and, like, threatening the UN, why would they do that?
Okay, that's, like, not our argument, right?
No, it is. The first part of your argument is that India is doing less peacekeepers now because they want a seat on the council. So if they get a seat on the council, that shows other countries
but
that
what
the way
they say, right? No,
less.
That's not true. What India has said, right, is that they get on the council, they'll be contributing more peacekeepers. That's why other countries say that if India's approach is successful, they'll do the same thing.
permanent member and they can't stop anything, then that means India can't either. Like his own concession cross up dams his first wars, right? Because like he's U.S. like why can't China do these things and agree to it? He says China like doesn't have this thing. It's just a Western thing.
Yeah, but don't get it confused, right? Because like, the IMF is a separate body, right? The Security Council doesn't pass resolutions that affects the IMF. And the IMF isn't a political institution. If you're able to pay back the loan, they'll give you the loan.
All right. Is everyone ready? Great.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
A little more. Sorry about that.
And then they can get into peace.
Now that
like,
I'm going to start on my opponent's contention too. Just changing it up. All right. Let's start with my opponent's second contention. My opponents basically argue that the UN should not be conducting interventions in the middle of conflict. These so-called responsibility to protect doctrine interventions are premised on the idea that the UN has a responsibility to intervene in conflicts when domestic governments are not fulfilling their obligations, when they're killing their own citizens, and when they're waging war. The problem is that if the UN can't intervene in the midst of conflict, this creates a big opportunity for countries to start conflict because they know that the UN can't intervene. Specifically, it creates incentive for India to inflame conflict in the Kashmir region which they dispute. Indeed, Con 15 confirms that India has been waiting 68 years to get onto the Security Council to leverage its seat to prevent a UN intervention in Kashmir. If it can stop peacekeepers from going into Kashmir, it gives India a green light to send more troops in and finally take the military conquest of the Kashmir region that they've wanted for so long. This is a reason why you should vote for our side on our Pakistan argument. It's another reason why India being on the Security Council would inflame tensions with Pakistan and increase the risk of war. But two, let's examine the warrants and the logic behind my opponent's arguments. They say that interventions fail because when peacekeepers go in, they don't know the terrain and the people there do better. That is somewhat true, but we realize the alternative. As my opponents point out, India supports what's called defensive peacekeeping, the traditional mode of peacekeeping that was used in the 90s, where peacekeepers don't intervene in conflicts and just stand by while killings happen. This is what we saw in Rwanda, when the peacekeepers stood by and let 500,000 Tutsis get massacred, and in Bosnia, where they created so-called safe zones against the Kosovos, but that did not do anything because the peacekeepers couldn't stop them. Indeed, Clark confirms that the so-called traditional method of peacekeeping, where the peacekeepers could not use offensive force, has failed every single time, and did fail in the 90s because peacekeepers were not authorized to use force. If peacekeepers can't fight back, then the people who are slaughtering civilians have no reason to stop. That is why there were failures in Rwanda, and that is why there were failures in Bosnia, which we cannot accept. A world in which India is on the Security Council is a world in which we have more of those failed interventions. But third, let's examine their other reason. They say that the UN goes in and does regime change, and they give the example of Libya. This is also factually incorrect. The Brookings Institution explains that the UN intervention into Libya happened in 2011, shortly after the Arab Spring, and the goal of the mission was very specific, to stop Gaddafi from massacring civilians in Benghazi. And that mission worked. The mission stopped him from ousting civilians. But Gaddafi was ousted, and the civil war started 2 years later, in 2013, when the NATO intervention went in. So actually, the UN intervention part was successful. It is the other parts that were not successful. My opponents themselves agree with this. The first claim that they make in their first intention is that peacekeepers work because they protect civilian lives. Offensive peacekeeping, R2P-led peacekeeping, allows peacekeepers to protect lives. But defensive and traditional methods of peacekeeping do not, because peacekeepers cannot intervene and raise the cost of conflict. Because peacekeepers cannot protect civilians, they stand by while slaughter occurs. We cannot allow that to happen. Now let's go to my opponent's first contention. I have a couple responses. Overall, the first response is that their contention 2 controls their first contention. Because even if India gives more peacekeepers or gives more money to peacekeepers, that doesn't matter if there are less good peacekeeping interventions. If peacekeepers can't stop the violence because they have no mandate, and they can't use offensive force to stop genocides, it doesn't matter if they have $7,000 or $700 million, they still won't be effective. But 2, Christian intent indicates that the reason why India gives money to peacekeepers and contributes lots of peacekeepers is not idealistic, it is political. India wants a seat, pure and simple. That is why they give so much money to peacekeepers. They don't actually like giving peacekeeping money. It is a ploy to say, I am a good contributing member, I want to be on the council. That'll become important later. Let's go to their warrants. Their first warrant says that India is going to give more money. This actually is not true. According to Neeson in 2013, none of the P5 members on the Security Council right now actually meet their dues for Security Council funds. And the reason why is simple. They have no incentive to. As I've explained, the only reason why India funds peacekeepers is political. If they have no incentive to get on the Security Council, they have also no incentive to give more money to the Security Council. Their second warrant says that India will give more peacekeeping troops. This is also empirically denied. Manvili 18 confirms that when India was on a non-permanent seat on the Security Council from 2011 to 2013, it reduced the number of peacekeepers that it gave, showing that when India has no political incentive to give more peacekeepers, they give less. Third, their warrant is that other nations will give more. But this argument actually functions against them, because if India can use because this shows nations that India will just give less peacekeepers in the future. So nations have no more reason to give more peacekeepers in the future. Finally, they have no warranting or no reasons why India would convince more peacekeepers. Why India would convince other nations to give more peacekeepers. Nations have their own entrenched interests, and we show that P5 nations don't give them. Thank you. Please negate today's resolution.
Can I see the evidence saying that PKOs were reduced when they had a non-permanent seat?
Yeah.
Alright, cool. I'll start that time.
You can run for it?
Yeah.
Alright, starting.
Okay. That was 45 seconds. So just going to be responding to what his rebuttal and then down his case. So let's start on my second contention. He basically says that traditional peacekeeping operations are ineffective and India basically blocks the successful proactive interventions. He starts off by saying, oh, traditional peacekeeping operations in the 1990s failed. That's not true. India isn't opposed to every single R2P intervention, but they're opposed to the ones that are similar to the ones in Libya that were like regime change. He says, no, the intervention in Libya was successful in 2011, and the NATO intervention was the one that was unsuccessful. The UN intervention approved the NATO intervention. The NATO intervention was an extension of the UN intervention. That's why the UN has taken a lot of heat for this intervention, and that's why India opposed the Libya intervention in 2011. India is opposed to these types of regime changes that increase the rate of killing by over 10 times. What India is not opposed to is successful humanitarian intervention, and this is the majority of all interventions. India likes peacekeeping on a whole. They're just opposed to the selective bad interventions. The next response he gives is he says, oh, Rwanda was a failure, but India will solve. The reason why Rwanda was a failure is not because it was a traditional operation, it's because we did not react quick enough. However, India has pledged that when they get onto the council, they're going to increase reaction time. Right now, reaction time is at 10 months, but what we tell you is that India is pushing for reforms to make this reaction time 1 month. That means we won't see failures like Rwanda, and all of the times that they say our failures won't happen anymore because there will be quicker reaction time, which means we will save more people quicker when we have India on the council. The next response he gives is then on our first contention, on our keeping the peace. He basically says less interventions means that it doesn't matter, but what we tell you is we're stopping the bad interventions and we're increasing the success of our good interventions by increasing peacekeeping operations. What we tell you is that the good interventions get better and the bad interventions don't happen anymore, where we see the rate of killing increase by over 700% in Libya. On our first warrant on increasing peacekeeping funding, he basically says that the only reason why they do this is because they want a seat. This is not true. They've pledged that if they get these seats, they will take over and they will contribute more and they will step up for the other members. So at that point, they're pledging that when they get that seat, they will step up for other members. This means that they're not going to go back on this promise because this is the campaign promise that they are running on in order for them to get the seats. On our second warrant on preventing the current withdrawal, he basically says that they reduced peacekeepers in 2011. That's because they oppose the Libyan intervention. But even more so, Lynch explicitly says that since 2011, or in 2011, they explicitly said they were going to cut back contributions because they said that they weren't being represented. And since 2011, we've seen a 21% reduction in number of peacekeepers. Why is this important? Our Miller evidence is very specific in saying every additional 1,000 peacekeepers is really, really important, because what we tell you is every 1,000 additional peacekeepers increases the chance of peace by 19%. On our third thing, on encouraging contributions, it just makes common sense. They're running on the platform of peace peacekeeping, other countries want to get into the Security Council, they're going to see India's success, and they're also going to, in turn, increase peacekeeping operations. Why does our case matter more than theirs? Because they're looking to one conflict around the world. We're looking to the global perspective. We're stopping things like the India-Kashmir conflict around the world. That's why our case is always going to be fundamentally more important. With that being said, let's go into their case. They tell you on their first warrant that there's economic punishments. This warrant doesn't make sense at the point at which they say China doesn't have control over the IMF. They say it's a Western institution. India is not a Western country, but even more so, they say China has no clout as a permanent member. If India is a permanent member, they're also not going to have a clout. They delink themselves in first cross. Then, on their second warrant, on the end of peace, they basically say there's going to be state-sponsored terror. We've seen this before. There's been a lot of state-sponsored terror. Why do they get to decide that the next attack is going to be the one that triggers nuclear war? This is a debate argument, not a real-life argument. What we tell you is that this has happened several times before, but even more so, he says that the UN is not neutral, but you can delink this in two ways. Deshaun 18 writes that both India and Pakistan both oppose mediation. He says it's just India that opposes mediation. This is not true. Both sides oppose this mediation, but even more so, you can turn the argument, because even when the Council does pass a rare resolution, you can turn it against them, because when the UN gets involved, that's really problematic, because Dawn 2015 explains that India passed, anytime there's a resolution, India only violates it, and that inflames tensions, because now, A, Pakistan has international backing for when they do the state-sponsored terror, and B, it inflames Pakistan even more, because India is just enraging them even more. Even more so, understand that India already has enough political power to influence the UN at the point which there hasn't been a single important resolution being passed since 1972. On their impact on nuclear war, mutually assured destruction will ensure that this never happens. Both sides don't want to destroy themselves through a nuclear war, but even more so, there's ways for this to de-escalate, and they're economically interdependent on each other.
Before Crossfire, can I see the evidence that there's been a 21% drop in the number of peacekeepers?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Actually, I don't see. Yeah, I'm ready.
Alright, so you have first question.
So I want to ask about those contribution numbers.
Yeah.
So you showed me a table from 2011 numbers and then from 2018.
Yeah.
And you report that 2011 number is 21% higher than the 2018 number in
Yeah.
terms of Indian peacekeepers, right?
Yeah.
But numbers fluctuate year by year, right? That's
Yeah,
not
so
a trend. You
so
sort of just pick 2 years.
so the Lynch evidence is going to be the reason why we get the link on this, because what we tell you is in 2011 India came out and they said if you don't give us this permanent seat, we're going to be withdrawing our contributions, and that's why we've been seeing since 2011 a steady decrease in the amount of
your Lynch evidence
contributions
says that India
up
has
until
threatened
20.
to.
What? Yeah, so we're saying that they followed through with that threat, considering these contributions have dropped by 21%. But up until 2011, they were the second largest contributor of peacekeepers, so clearly something changed.
But year by year data is not a trend. A better indicator is
over the past 7 years.
Hindu, which is an Indian paper, which is bragging about both that India contributes the most peacekeepers in the world, and 2, that India also has the highest number of PKO casualties.
Yeah, so
India uses this as a source of pride. The marginal number of how many peacekeepers they give doesn't really matter, insofar as India still is proud of contributing the most peacekeepers in the world, right?
Okay, so if they're proud of contributing peacekeepers, that delinks the fact that you're just saying they're doing it to get onto the council, because that means they're going to continue to do it afterwards.
Well, they're proud to show off to other nations. You yourself said it very well in your speech. You said they called it a campaign tactic. It's exactly a campaign tactic.
Yeah, so if it works, this is once again our third warrant. What we tell you is if it works for them, that means other countries will also step up, right?
What?
So, if India runs on the platform that if we contribute peacekeepers, we will get onto the council, that means other nations that want to get onto the council, like Germany and Japan, are going to be like, yeah, we should probably do this too. In fact, Japan has explicitly said that they don't contribute peacekeepers because they don't think it's going to get onto the council. But if
Hold on. That is not the warrant you read. The warrant you read is that India is going to convince other nations to give more peacekeeping troops.
No, the warrant is if other nations see that India gets onto the council contributing a lot of peacekeepers, other nations will be like, we should probably try that as well.
Sure, and the response that I read is that is self-defeating, right? Because nations, it may work in the short term that Germany says, I'm going to give 1,000 more peacekeepers for this 1 year, but Germany knows that once it gets on the council,
Okay,
that it cannot
here's
be
the thing,
peacekeepers.
right?
That's the whole problem with
We're not
using
going to be expanding the council. India's been given peacekeepers for 50 years. It's going to be a long time before another country gets on the council. So this is 50 years of Japan, Germany, these countries giving a lot more
My point is
peacekeepers.
that it's not a sustainable strategy to peg the entire number of troops in an army to a campaign pledge.
Okay,
we all
so
know the campaign pledges don't follow through.
so can we move on to your case
That's
real
not
quickly?
great. Sure.
Okay, sure. So you talk about like how this one terror attack is going to like spirit a new nuclear war. Isn't
No.
this really convenient
Hold
for
on.
like your case?
Hold on. We're not talking about one terrorist attack. We're talking about India getting on the Security Council, posing an existential risk to Pakistan's economy, both by collapsing Pakistan's economy and, as I pointed out in your second mention, allowing India to invade Kashmir. This convinces Pakistan that it has to retaliate through terrorism, which is the main strategy of state terrorism. And it incentivizes them to do a massive terrorist attack on India, which also incentivizes India to retaliate in a big
Okay,
way.
so this link chain is really convoluted, right? We can all find ways that nuclear war could happen. What we say is there's a really low probability that it will, and there's a virtually zero chance that it has.
This is the most likely chance that you could and should be avoided at all costs. Thank you. We'll take it.
Where are we going? We need to go for peacekeeping. Yeah, I was just going to say, do I go for the second contention? You have to like frontline it, right? Yeah. Just be a lot of probability. There's like a 1 billion chance of nuclear war, and they like increase that by like 1,000%. It's still a 1 in like 100 million chance of nuclear war. We tell you, we know we can solve conflicts that are actually happening right now.
I'm going to start out on weighing their case.
Sorry, I'm in the copy. I know my face looks very blank, but I am in fact paid attention and checked in, so don't worry.
All right, y'all good?
Yeah.
They say you should prefer their impacts because there are many conflicts, but you just don't know which conflicts. You don't know how many people are dying. Our impact evidence is very explicit in saying that on first strike, 12 million people would die from nuclear war. That is just far more people, and that is just why it is the most important impact. Now, go to their second contention. Remember the first response from Khan, which Daniel reads, which they drop, which is that the only reason that India is not launching up their attacks against Pakistan is because they are scared of UN intervention forces. They are scared that if they become more aggressive, the UN will prevent them from intervening. But if India's on the council, they can veto UN presence in the region. And once that happens, Khan says that India will start attacking Pakistan. The reason why that's so important is because we don't have to win any argument about the IMF or about Pakistan not liking the UN anymore, because insofar as India is attacking them, our Herrera evidence indicates that they will immediately be overwhelmed and have to launch a nuke in response as the only way to respond. Their only response is mutually assured destruction. That is just not responsive to all the things that we say in case. Remember Lendon, who says that the Pakistani nukes are controlled by low-level commanders. That does not, who at the sign of any first strike will use them. That's not institutionalized match. Or Herrera, who says that Pakistan will have to use nukes anyways because they believe it is the only way to survive because India's military is so much stronger. With that, let's go to their case. They say, on their first contention, remember that India will give less peacekeepers and will fund a lot less. They just say no, they'll fund more because they pledged to, but they drop the reasoning that Daniel gives. Once they are on the council, they will give less peacekeepers and less funding because there is no need to give peacekeepers on funding. The reason why they're doing it right now, like they tell you themselves, is so that they can get on the council in the first place. But if they're on their council and they have a permanent seat, there's no need to do any contributions because they have a permanent seat, which is why there's not a single country on the P5 who is in the top 10 of amount of peacekeeper contributions. That means that peacekeeping becomes far less effective. Then remember, on their second contention, they drop also the analysis that we give, that India will shift to defensive peacekeeping with no mandates. That means that you can't stop any conflicts, because if I am in a conflict zone and I don't have a gun, I can't de-escalate conflict in any way. They're right. We're not talking about RTP. We're just saying every peacekeeping mission, they no longer have guns. They can no longer stop conflict, and every conflict becomes Rwanda or Bosnia, where hundreds of thousands die. Thank you, and we are very proud to negate.
We're gonna run probes.
Okay, so our traditional inclusive response time, we solve for response time
Yeah.
extending on them reducing drop our first point like center for second 2 points, right? On preventing withdrawal peacekeeping operation, let's just say they're coming out by 21% right now. On the third one, be like other countries step up. This is 15 more years of Japan, Germany, and other countries, right? So
What about 2?
R2P just be like stop bad interventions where like killing increased by 100%. And India's most interventions that they supported Rwanda, they came out and supported Rwanda. They just do like these types of interventions that are like extremely unsuccessful empirically. And on their case, on like just like for probability, right? They just like and also they drop veto power, right? Just be like India. India already controls the UN. There's been no resolution since 1970.
And even if China would just veto it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna go their case, our case, and then Wang. Alright, is everybody ready? Let's start off on their case. They go for this peace argument. Remember, one of their internal links is that there's going to be like more state-sponsored terrorism. This isn't unique. There's already a lot of terrorism right now, like the Mumbai attacks in 2008. But then, most importantly, let's get on the UNSC issue. India and Pakistan won. They both oppose mediation by the UNSC, so it's not going to happen. But second of all, most importantly, the UNSC has not passed a resolution regarding Kashmir since 1971. They prefer to stay out of the issue. But grant them the best version of their argument, and a resolution comes to the table. China, who is a major ally of Pakistan, would probably just veto it, so no interventions happen anyway. Even if you don't buy that, mutually assured instruction assures that any nuke attack won't happen, but then on probability, right? There is a very, very low chance that any nuclear war will happen, while on our side of the house, we know that there are conflicts around the world that we can stop with more peacekeepers, because Miller says that there's a 19% increase in peace for every additional 1,000 peacekeepers. Let's go on to our side of the house, right? First, on preventing withdrawal of current peacekeeping operations, they say that they decrease troop numbers. This is correct, right? Lynch says that India in 2011 cut back peacekeeping contributions by 20%. That's horrible, right? Because for every 1,000 increase in peacekeepers, we see peace go up by 19%. Then on encouraging contributions, right? Other countries have specifically stated that if India's strategy works, that means that they will now contribute more peacekeepers. More peacekeepers is better because that means more peace. Then we can go in and solve conflicts around the world that we know are happening now, whereas we don't know what the probability of nuclear war is. Then on pulling the plug, they say that India is wants to intervene. That's not true because India is opposed to regime change. That's really bad. But recognize India solves because India wants to decrease the reaction time from 10 months to 1 month. That turns their entire case. But then remember that India is opposed. Then on Libya, right? The UN intervention is what allowed the NATO action to happen. India likes the good humanitarian intervention, which saves lives and increased peace. Let's do a little bit of weighing. You wrote off probability. There's a super low chance of nuclear war in the neg world, while the pro world actually solves conflicts that we know are happening right now with peacekeeping operations. One, we know that contributions will increase with India and encourage others to step up their contributions. And second of all, the empirics explicitly show that peace rises by 19% with every additional 1,000 troops. We also know that peacekeeper operations decrease the risk of repeat conflicts like civil war by 85%. We know that peacekeepers are good. We know these conflicts are happening. Therefore, you vote for the affirmative off probability. Thank you.
Alright. Is everyone ready for concept?
Yeah, you guys have first question.
Yeah. So, I want to ask a bit about this argument concerning peacekeepers, right? So, it matters if there's 1,000 peacekeepers or 2,000 peacekeepers, right?
Yeah.
It also matters if peacekeepers can have things like guns or tanks.
Yeah, so
right?
let's talk about this, right? You try to...
Sorry, wait. Which requires funding, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So if India gets on the council and cuts funding, that means that that's a problem.
So-
right?
so
Even
right-
if there's more peacekeepers,
Yeah.
if they have less money to work with.
Yeah,
then
so
they're less effective.
India actually, the way they contribute is not through funding, but rather they contribute through actually providing the troops. Their funding is actually very, very low. It's like 0.01%. Their way of contributions by contributing troops.
That's-
So even
that's
if India
actually-
cuts out, they're like
sorry,
0.1% funding.
Sorry, that's actually not true. India contributes $30 million every year.
That is 0.1%
Yes.
of the budget. Like, I can pull this
They're
up.
one of the highest funders. These
This is just not true. This is just like
Wait.
I can
We
pull
can
up. I
show
can
you
pull
the
up the
epics.
peacekeeping budget.
Hold on. The peacekeeping budget is not like large as a whole because peacekeepers are economical, but India is one of the highest contributors. As we
They contribute a lot of troops, but they don't contribute a lot of money. The P5 contributes the money, and India contributes the troops.
Hold on. India is the seventh largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, you can call for the card if
Look,
you want
listen,
it,
they
right?
just
India just does not contribute a lot
like
of money, and they
0.1%.
contribute the troops. If in fact they contribute more money when you vote for us, because the P5 is obligated to spend more.
Alright, do you wanna
So that's probably a turn. All right, yeah. So on your case, the link into this entire nuclear war scenario is a Pakistani terror attack. They've been
Sorry, no, stop.
That's not.
Our link into our argument has not been responded. The link that we were using is the turn that we read on your second contention about Khan. We kicked out of all of the IMS stuff.
so
And
the
UN
only
stuff.
offense you have is this turn off Khan.
It's the turn that has not been responded to the entire time.
All right, so let's talk about Khan.
I mean, look, Grand Cross is like way too.
I mean, like I feel like we've interacted with this, right?
Yeah, we definitely have. But let's just talk about it. Just
Yeah,
I
sure.
mean, you haven't, but I'd be
All
happy
right.
to talk about it. Yeah.
Let's just
Yeah,
talk
sure.
about
Let's walk through Khan.
Sure.
All right. So, how does Khan trigger conflict?
Well, wait, hold on. Khan doesn't. He writes about the
No,
fear.
No, I
So
mean,
what
like,
Khan says
what is
is that India has wanted to start a war with Pakistan literally since they started, especially in Kashmir, because that's the territory that they want. But the reason that they haven't is because UN peacekeepers have always been stationed there. So he doesn't want to fight a peacekeeping force, and he's worried that India,
Yeah,
if they
so-
attack
Two things,
Here's the
right?
response that we made. What we tell you is that India already has like leverage over the UNSC, which is why there hasn't been a resolution since the 1970s. So if they wanted to, they've had the green light for 40 years.
Hold on. There hasn't been a resolution in the sense that there haven't been peacekeepers.
But let's say we
No,
grant you like the
As in,
best
like every
version of
time
your
there's a
argument.
resolution, like they strike it down because they have enough leverage within the UNSC.
Let's say we-
No, sure, but hold on. But again, that isn't responsive to what we're saying, because if India launched an attack,
All right,
they would be killing peacekeepers.
real quick, right?
who are there.
Then
So it
you
doesn't
don't.
matter if there's
All right.
resolutions or not.
You don't interact, right, with even if we grant you the best version of your argument, right? China, very good allies with Pakistan, they'd most likely just veto any resolution that comes to the table. Either way, India really isn't getting much increased influence over the Kashmir region if they were to be on the
That's
Security
why we
Council.
want the UN peacekeepers to intervene.
Yeah, because India's the one who's attacking.
Is everyone ready?
Mhm.
Great. Let's begin. The most important issue in this round is preventing a disastrous war between India and Pakistan. This war, according to the New York Times, would kill 12 million people instantly and be absolutely devastating. My opponents say nuclear war is unlikely, but nuclear war between India and Pakistan is the most likely out of any of the nuclear war scenarios, and is incredibly likely as demonstrated by our arguments, because India and Pakistan have been going at it for 68 years and having very tense conflict. I'm going to now explain why conflict is so likely, and the chance of it increases if you vote for us. But quickly, our argument should outweigh their arguments, because even if they stop some conflicts, we are stopping the most deadly conflict that would kill hundreds of millions of people. Here's how we win our argument. India and Pakistan were countries born by conflict, by a bloody partition, and they've been fighting over this disputed region of Kashmir for 68 years. Both countries want to control it. Our Khan evidence indicates that with a seat on the Security Council, India would use that seat to prevent the UNSC from intervening in a conflict in Kashmir, as they did the first time India tried to invade Kashmir in 1965. This is really problematic, because Khan indicates that this gives India the green light to intervene in Kashmir and try to take it back, a nation that they believe. My opponents respond by saying that China would veto it. This is the exact opposite. China is the ally of Pakistan and thus would sanction a UN intervention into Kashmir. This is India's exact fear. But if they are on the Security Council, they can use a veto to prevent that from happening. This is really problematic because Pakistan is outmatched by India in every conventional metric. That is why our Herrera evidence indicates that Pakistan has adopted a first-use nuclear doctrine strike, which they say that after a short while of being beaten by India, they will deploy nuclear weapons. My opponents say mutually assured destruction checks back. This happens on a level in which there are lots of actors who are rational, but every individual person is an irrational actor, because I am very afraid if a big country is going to attack me. That is why it's very important that they drop our loose nukes argument, which says that individual commanders are the ones who hold the keys to the nuclear buttons in Pakistan, not lots of government officials. It is very easy for them to trigger a nuclear war. Our chance is high. But two, even if you want to vote my opponents on this peacekeeping idea, we win it as well. Because we say that the only reason why India gives any peacekeepers at all is a political ploy. They give money as a political ploy, and they give peacekeepers as a political ploy. But putting them on the Security Council incentivizes them to drop that funding, making both peacekeeping worse and every other outcome worse. Thank you, and please engage today's resolution.
Alright, we're gonna take the rest for it.
Oh, if the commanders were so loose, they would have done it. massive nukes. I wrote that down. Say that if it was so loose, then the conflict that happened a few weeks ago, the commanders would be like shocked away. It's obviously not that easy.
Alright, so just going to be their case with the con evidence and then our case on peacekeepers and then we'll 2 seconds. So, let's start on their case. They basically say they have the most likely scenario of nuclear war, but what we tell you is mutually assured destruction is why our Huth evidence concludes that even in the quote-unquote most likely chance of war, we see the chance of war is quote-unquote virtually 0. Even if the chance of war is 1 in 1 billion right now, and they increase that by 100% or 1,000%, what we tell you is that it's still a 1 in 100 million chance of war. What we tell you is there are conflicts that we know 100% are happening right now, and we can save these lives no matter what. The chance of their arguments ever materializing is very, very low, at the point in which our evidence indicates the chance of conflict right now is very, very low. Even if they exponentially increase that chance of conflict, what we tell you is probably not going to happen. So let's go to their con evidence. They basically say when India gets onto the council, they can veto these things. But what we tell you is this doesn't change China's vote, right? India doesn't influence the way China votes, and their evidence says that China has been voting against these resolutions. What we tell you is that doesn't change in their world. China still has their veto power. That means India can't intervene because China votes against any of these interventions. This means it's dealing the entirety of their case at the point in which China still has their veto power and they vote against these interventions. None of their impact materialize. Then, go to our case. The only response we get is this argument about funding. However, the problem is what we tell you is 1, India does not fund money economically, they fund troops, but 2, what we tell you is permanent members are required to fund more, so we actually see more funding in our world. But even more so, he clean drops our second and third warrant. Our second warrant is saying because they're not on the permanent council, they're cutting back troops by 21%. That's really, really important because India is the largest contributor of peacekeepers. And our third warrant tells you that if India gets onto the council, that means other countries like Germany, Japan, and a lot of other countries will step up contributions. This is really important for 2 reasons. The first is going to be the Miller evidence, which explains that every 1,000 additional peacekeepers increases the chance of peace around the world by 19%. There's tons of conflicts around the world, not just Kashmir, but the second evidence is going to be the Herger evidence, which means that if we increase peacekeeping, we could see global conflict reduced by 2/3. At the end of the day, because we impact out on probability and magnitude, what you're going to understand that our arguments are fundamentally more important than theirs because they're simply just more probable. The chance of nuclear war is not very likely, but the chance of solving conflicts is 100% in our world because what we explain is we know these conflicts are going around the world and we know that peacekeepers have empirically helped them.